Hello, I'm David Hunt, CEO and founder of Hyperion Executive Search and your host for the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. Welcome to the first episode of 2024. Now, one of the things that we clearly need as an industry, and in particular for founders, entrepreneurs and VCs, is some level of clarity and certainty. And there was a post by one of my guests recently around that issue of bringing certainty and some element of clarity from a policy perspective that sort of led for me to reach out to invite him to the studio today. And I'm glad that he has joined us. So I am joined today by Bill Esterson, who is the MP for Sefton Central.
That's the one.
And is the Shadow Transport Minister for Transport and Roads. Hopefully soon the actual Minister for Transport and Roads. Bill, glad to have you with us.
Well, it's great to be here, David. Thank you very much for reaching out. And as you say, certainty is key to giving investors confidence, and it's very much a theme of mine. It goes back to the fact that I ran a business, or started and grew several businesses actually, for 15 years before I was first elected in 2010. And Labour has developed an industrial strategy, and at the heart of that industrial strategy is a long-term commitment to being partners with industry and business and investors. And that partnership is predicated on giving confidence and creating that certainty and creating a climate where the investment community wants to put its money into the UK again in the kind of sums that we need to really transform our prospects. So that's my prospectus, David, and it underpins what I want to talk to you about today.
Yeah, we touched on that, and Bill's got a great LinkedIn game, by the way, so do join in there. And that's where, again, we primarily connected, even though you are obviously a local politician. Let me start by just getting it clear for the audience exactly the brief that you have. So as Shadow Minister for Roads, your brief includes automotive sector, roads and motoring, logistics, decarbonisation, and air quality and integrated transport. Now, lots there to unpick, but you're also involved in the APPGs for carbon capture and storage and for hydrogen. So again, very big topics for our audience. We want to focus initially on mobility, but even before that, picking up on your point then around your previous career, always keen to get a little bit of a backstory, so to speak. So what led you from being an entrepreneur and founding businesses to head to Westminster?
Well, I've always been interested in politics, come from a political family. Mum and dad were both councillors, and my dad was an agent in 3 general elections, twice successfully.
Right.
And so it's always been in the blood. I was a local councillor for 15 years, same time as I was running the businesses, actually. And this was a very obvious next step. Well, it was an obvious next step to a lot of my friends and family. Right. It wasn't something I really considered until not long before I decided to do it. But I mean, that's where it came from. But look, I'm delighted to use my experience as an entrepreneur in politics, in engaging with the business community on behalf of the Labour Party, and I certainly intend to carry on making the most of it.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's often comes up, and again, don't talk too much about politics on the episode, but there's always a sort of a disconnect, and certainly often perceived and often real, I'm sure, the disconnect between politicians and actual work. Many politicians are career politicians as opposed to people who've done something useful in the past. So it's great to have someone who obviously has that sort of entrepreneurial background, has sort of lived and breathed it a little bit before starting to solve things from a policy perspective. But yeah, it must have been a big. So did you close your businesses gradually, or they hand off, or how did you sort of make the leap fully into deciding to run for Parliament?
Yeah, well, in 2010, we'd just gone through the global financial crisis, and the main business that my wife and I ran was in leadership and management. Okay. And the first thing that many large corporates cut was investment in their own teams, and we'd gone through a really, really tough time. It's a story that's common to lots of business people from that era.
Yeah.
So becoming an MP was quite rather timely because we didn't have a huge amount of income. I mean, our income just fell off a cliff at the time. Yeah. So it was a bit of a timely opportunity for me. But the business carried on. My wife, once she had re-established her home life in the wonderful Liverpool City region where we moved to, moved 250 miles to come here when I was selected as a candidate, even before I became the MP. We had two young children. We had to get them acclimatized and used to living away from their friends and family. So once she'd done that, the business gradually recovered. Again, it took time because of the fallout from the financial crisis, actually. And now she's firing on all cylinders again with her latest endeavour, which is exploring the world of podcasts, actually, in leadership and management, amongst other opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important area. It's interesting you touch on that about people cutting investment in people, in their people, as one of the first things to go when, preachers to the converted to some extent should be the last thing that you stop investing in. So, well, let's talk a little bit about some of the topics that you're involved in, because again, I think, one of the posts that reached out to you that I connected around was around electrification of transport. So tell me at what point you became, from a personal level, sort of interested in the sort of the EV world, if you like, e-mobility and the electrification of transport. Did politics lead you there, or was that a personal thing that led you there? Obviously, they're combined now, I guess. But what sort of led you to really pick up and be very vocal about the need for us to electrify?
Yeah, I think I became increasingly conscious, like a lot of people, of the impending climate crisis over decades. You go back to Al Gore 25 years ago, nearly.
Yeah, that's scary, isn't it?
And an inconvenient truth. You go back further than that with what was happening in some parts of the political and economic world. But certainly in the last 15 years or so, we had the Copenhagen Agreement, which Ed Miliband, then climate secretary, who's now come back to lead for my party on energy and climate, again in the shadow cabinet and hopefully in the cabinet soon. And it's been apparent for a very long time that we had to completely change the way that we generate energy in particular, and dramatically reduce our carbon footprint. And we've been way too slow. So there is an awakening now that's happened much more quickly, I think, isn't there? And electric vehicles, the rapid decarbonisation of transport and road transport in particular are now they're accepted as inevitable and desirable, and for some people increasingly attractive. I mean, I drive an electric car and I love driving it. Not everybody's quite got there yet with seeing it in those terms, but it's coming, and now we've got to do everything we can to make it as attractive, as affordable, and as easy to transition as we possibly can. So, I think there's lots of metaphors coming here, aren't there? But we've been on a journey, and it's going to be a continuous one.
Yeah, it seems to be, though, that again, there's a lot of people who are hedging, I would say, in politics and in business and corporations, and particularly with the auto OEMs, hedging. They're sort of making good noises around EV, but they're still not really convinced. And the same with some politicians, and certainly, which won't mention. But it seems to be, certainly with yourself and with the comments that you make around from a party level, this is a genuine, you see it as an opportunity where we can really, from a UK perspective, really boost the economy and jobs through this. It's not just some kind of, we ought to do this because it's a green thing to do. It's an opportunity, which it clearly is, but not too many seem to see it in that way.
Yeah, and as a prospective government, as a government in waiting, it's very much part of our plans. We've got 5 missions. The first is to secure the highest growth in the G7. The second, which is really the means to deliver the first, is to become what we call a clean energy superpower by becoming self-sufficient in the generation of renewable electricity, primarily through wind and solar, but supported by nuclear, and in this part of the world, certainly tidal is an exciting prospect. There's a role for hydrogen here as well, and carbon capture. But we see this as one of the other missions, as an opportunity to transform the prospects of people up and down the country, because of the jobs it will create. It's going to cut bills. We've got opportunities in energy generation, in the transition in transport. It's true also in energy efficiency in property. I mean, there are 19 million homes in the UK that are below EPC level C. That's 10 years of work, particularly for smaller builders, which will create very, very well-paid jobs for hundreds of thousands of technical workers. So there's hundreds of thousands of jobs in energy efficiency and insulation. There's hundreds of thousands more in transport. This really can be, and we're very well placed in this country because of our science base, our university base, the entrepreneurial and innovative traditions we have here, and the almost unique advantages we have in geography and geology to support the generation of renewable energy in this country and to boost our manufacturing base at the same time. So if we want to embrace this as an opportunity, as well as accepting the imperative of addressing the climate crisis, it's there for us to take. And that's very much what the Labour approach is going to be. It's what the industrial strategy has at its heart, and it's why we want to partner with industry and investors to really make the most of this opportunity for everybody.
Of course, you don't have a magic wand, either personally or as a government, when and if you come into power. But certainly, as a solar entrepreneur since 2007, and more recently as a more broad clean tech entrepreneur, it's operating globally. But within the UK, it's been quite apparent that the present government are quite ideologically opposed to solar, in particular, and onshore wind. Now, obviously, there has been some change recently with onshore wind, but there hasn't, because there hasn't actually been much sort of built since they made those announcements. How and what do you think is possible to us? Because we have done well as a nation, let's be fair. Despite the difficulties, we've installed a lot of solar, and obviously for offshore wind, there's a good base there. But how can we really ramp that up? Because the key thing you touched on in one of your posts recently was, if we're going to electrify all of transportation, we need to be able to power it, essentially. So what's your thoughts on how you would like to see, solar and wind in particular, you've just touched on, escalated? How can you go about that?
Yeah, well, it's essential that we do it. There's a lot that needs to happen to speed up the process where wind farms can come on stream, for example. I think there was a big wind farm in Scotland that recently opened, and it was first approved by Gordon Brown when he was Prime Minister. That's how long it took. I mean, this is absurd. We've got this terribly slow planning system that we've identified as one of the key blocks in the way of development. We've clearly got to speed up the process. I think we've also got to create a more resilient and strengthened manufacturing base in this country. I mean, it's mad that the steel for our wind turbines is manufactured abroad and then shipped to this country. And we've got to strengthen our steel industry. At the moment, our steel industry is in intensive care. We've got as part of our industrial strategy, our plan is to invest public money in transitioning the steel industry to clean steel with electric arc furnaces, and when ultimately we touched on hydrogen ready furnaces, because if you're going to make virgin steel, you can only do it with furnaces. But I went to British Steel when I was in my previous job in the industry role in August before the reshuffle, and they were telling me that they tried to get a grid connection so that they could. This is British Steel, who are owned by Xinjiang, the Chinese massive steel producers, and they were telling me that they'll have to wait till 2034 to get the grid connection, so that they can change to electric arc furnaces. Now, this is absolute lunacy. It's
crazy.
So we've got to change public policy to enable these things to happen in the UK in a range of industries that are linked to the success of our energy sector.
Yeah, it's crazy. We all know, certainly within the circles that operate, we all know that it's difficult to get a grid capacity, a grid connection for EV charging or for renewables. But you don't think about necessarily for some of these hard to wait industries that need all the help that they can get. You touched on that. Not far away is Pilkington's, of course, glass manufacturing, where they're looking at putting these electric furnaces in. But even there, if you're struggling to connect, so I guess the question is, how much, from your insight, how much is a policy hold up, something that can be fixed through legislation, and how much is from, and we touched on this before, an infrastructure investment that perhaps the government takes some responsibility for the infrastructure rather than the sort of the stuff that the private sector is quite happy to fund outside of that.
Yeah, and I think there are institutional investors who are very interested in investing in infrastructure, and there are private equity funds who are very interested in supporting new technology. What they both want is stability. They want an economy that is well managed. They want to know that we're not going to have big shocks to the economy or the political situation, which is sadly what we've seen rather too much of. I mean, we've had so many. I mean, it's hard to keep up with the number of prime ministers and chancellors and business secretaries and energy secretaries.
You run out of fingers soon enough.
And then we had. I mean, look, the Liz the Liz Truss Kwasi Kwarteng
event
mini budget of September 2022 is still haunting us because you only have to look at your own mortgage rates to see we're paying premium because of uncertainty and lack of confidence in the markets. So I think one of Liz Truss said in autumn 2023 she found that a lot less stressful than autumn 2022. The rest of the country said, "Yeah, Liz, we do too." Thank you very much for reminding us.
Yeah.
But look, I think our biggest task actually is what Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, is focused on. It's what Keir Starmer, as the leader of the opposition, is focused on, and all of my colleagues on the shadow ministerial teams. We have to create a sense of stability that we won't be making uncosted commitments. Everything that Labour commits to in our manifesto will be carefully costed. All of the announcements we've made so far, we've identified exactly where the money is coming from. To reassure the markets, to make sure we don't have unnecessary surprises and shocks. They're going to make interest rates higher than they would otherwise be, and that is absolutely critical. So sound money's at the heart of this, and that's what you'll hear from Labour now, and it's what you'll see from us in government, because we want investors to see this country as a very, very good place to put their money in infrastructure and in technology, because that's the future, and that's where we'll succeed.
So we know that it's going to be, it's difficult. Clearly, the global economics are challenging. Clearly, they haven't been, run particularly well in many countries, certainly here as well. But so it's not as if you're going to have a sort of a magic money tree, as the old saying goes. But how much can we solve, do you think, through those policy changes? Things like speeding up grid connections, things like planning and permitting that you touched on, seem to me at least to be policy hold-ups rather than financial hold-ups. Are those things that you'd like to see or think can be solved in a reasonably quick time? And we tend to always think in parliamentary terms, which is one of the big frustrations. But in a first parliament, do you think that's feasible to start to unlock some of these things?
Well, I think we have to see some early wins. There's no two ways about it. So financial stability underpins all of this. Planning speed, yes, and you've got to put planning officers back in. We've got to recruit. We've got to train people to do some of this. So some of this is going to be faster than others, but changing some of the regulatory framework to speed up decisions. I think. There are very obvious changes, like the rules around onshore wind. Now, you mentioned it before, David. The government, on the face of it, made it easier to apply for onshore wind in September with the announcement that Michael Gove made. There's not been a single bid because it's still hugely problematic, and it's easier to apply for a waste to energy incinerator than for an onshore wind farm, and we've got to make it much easier and much more straightforward. And I think it's I'm trying to remember the exact term. It's changing the descriptor for an onshore wind farm to a nationally significant project. That would be the obvious way of doing it. So there's a number of steps that will help. Giving licenses for floating offshore wind is another. Supporting the solar industry. I mean, we've got a good record in government of support actually for investment. R&D tax credits is a success story of Gordon Brown's that is still in operation today, and it's that kind of approach that will encourage investment, encourage businesses to speed up the rate at which we increase the capacity and the generation of renewables. It's all doable, and in the end, though, I think it comes back to partnership, and it comes back to what does industry need, what do investors need, and that's why getting to know people now while we're in opposition, building up those relationships, knowing who to turn to in government, that's going to be as important as any of the specific changes that I've talked about in the last minute or two, because people will be able to tell us, look, this isn't working, or if you do this, we'll be able to make some progress. Yeah. Those are the sorts of practical, real world ways of changing things. Look, I started and grew businesses. I worked with some of the biggest corporations in the world in my time in the private sector. That's how you operate in business. I think we've got to run the country much more in that way. And something that this reminds me of, there is always the challenge of how the civil service operates. And my colleagues who've been ministers tell me of their stories and their frustrations and their challenges. Yeah, but look, we think we've found a way forward, and having Sue Gray as Keir Starmer's chief of staff is hugely important here, because she's got that experience and that insight. But in how to work with civil servants to be as effective as possible. But you have this silo mentality, where different departments don't talk. You can see it now. The transport department doesn't talk to the business department, or none of them talk to the treasury. The way of breaking that down is to take this approach with missions. I mentioned the missions that we've set out. I mentioned 3 of them before on the growth, the clean energy, and the opportunity missions. And the way you achieve missions is by saying, look, this is the end objective for everybody in government. Everybody has to work to that mission. And we know this works because we've seen a recent example of it, very successful example of it. And this might be the only time on this podcast where I pay tribute to the Conservatives. But this was the Vaccine Task Force was a mission. And it was a mission to save as many lives as possible. And it cut across every government department. And now the imperative was there because of the life and death situation that we all faced. But we need to apply a similar sense of importance to the missions that we've set when we go into government, if we are going to break down those barriers and move with the kind of speed that you were quite rightly saying is needed if we are to address this. Look, the climate crisis might not be killing us tomorrow or the day after in the way that COVID-19 was. But it's going to kill a lot of people and make life very, very difficult for all of us if we don't act on it, and if we don't act on it very, very soon. So it's as urgent, even if the longer term, the consequences are further away.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on that actually, because there's another part of your experience which we can tap into. But just on that last point, I should say, how many politicians broadly get that way of thinking? Because like you say, I work primarily with startups, but you work with corporates as well. And that sense of mission is what gets shit done, basically.
Definitely.
And it does cut through a lot of the stuff and the sort of the things that can easily get in the way. They aren't necessarily done maliciously. They're just stuff that doesn't need to be there. So do you think that politicians broadly can get into that mindset of this is the goal and not the process that seems to hold everything up, or the literally the politics of it all?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of this comes down to what I did in my professional life, actually, which is around good leadership and management, and the key nature, the key need for good relationships and trust, and that applies between politicians, but it applies between politicians and people in the private sector and people across the public sector. So if we're going to succeed, we've got to really work closely with other people, and this is where I come back to industrial strategies as where I think this really needs to come from. By having an approach that has a long-term set of goals, underneath the overarching missions, you give yourself a chance, and at the heart of industrial strategy is partnership.
Yeah.
And there's no other way of delivering a strategy across an economy unless you have strong working relationships between the different elements.
And that collaboration, absolutely. Picking up on your last point, as I say, in the UK, certainly at the moment, then climate change isn't killing too many people, perhaps more elsewhere. But you also are, I think I read somewhere, involved in sort of air pollution, or having in the past as an issue. And clearly air pollution in the UK is killing tens of thousands of people, or affecting certainly negatively tens of thousands of people in the country. Tying back up to I guess the loose ends before we move on in the electrification side, where do you, things like ULEV, which was caused consternation down south, and Manchester recently just revoked on doing something similar. Where do you see the electrification of transport, particularly in and around cities, and the integration of sort of transport, public sector, public transport within cities, solving this massive problem which does exist that often isn't talked about?
It does, and Rishi Sunak talks about the war on the motorist. I mean, I'll wax lyrical on it, but if there's a war on the motorist, he's missed the fact that he's been in government for nearly 14 years and halved the pothole repair budget, and insurance premiums have been allowed to go up again, which is to do with the economic problems more widely. And hasn't given the support to the decarbonisation agenda that he should. His negative comments about net zero and pushing back the end of new petrol and diesel cars have really undermined consumer confidence. But anyway, that's a slightly different issue. I mean, incidentally, air quality is a massive issue here. Some of the worst air quality in the country is outside the port of Liverpool, and life expectancy there is 13 years lower than it is 2 miles away. This is a huge challenge. So the faster we can get people out of polluting vehicles, the better, or reduce the number of journeys in polluting vehicles, which I think is also part of it. So look, the answer here is an integrated transport strategy, which is what you were asking me, making it attractive for people to use the train and the bus, as well as changing their vehicle. Making it easy to cycle and walk more often. Now, as far as the bus goes, there are more. The biggest number of public transport journeys are by bus. I was writing about this the other day, I think, as I remember as well. And we we've seen London retain its regulated system, so people travel on the bus. It's relatively affordable. It's very reliable, and it's a good way of getting around. Certainly central London. Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester now has a similar option with his B network, and Steve Rotherham, the Metro Mayor in the Liverpool City region, has recently announced alongside the combined authority here that we're going to do the same thing here. Now, obviously, it's the B network in Manchester, so it's going to be the A network in Liverpool. You will understand the dynamic and the rivalries there. But we're in government, what we want to do actually is to make a re-regulated system the presumed option for all transport authorities, and to undo the damage that's been done by the dramatic cut in the number of, I think the number of bus routes has halved since 2010. But it's giving people really attractive and affordable alternatives to travelling in their car. I think that's a big part of it, as much as changing to electric vehicles. So,
but change those vehicles to electric in terms of buses. Again, we've seen.
You've seen there's a lot of electric buses in London already. Yeah. Again, that's a big part of the change that's got to happen. It's very doable in buses, isn't it? Because you can have the charging points in the depot. The journeys are the right sort of length to not have a problem with running out of battery power as well. So all of these things are part of the answer very much.
I wanted to touch on before we conclude. There's a couple of things because again we've touched on my passion around electrification of everything possible, and obviously solar and wind significantly behind that, and you shared some of those thoughts. But of course there are technologies that are often mooted, particularly by this government, which are I think valid, but often misrepresented, and that's carbon capture and storage and the use of hydrogen, both of which you have some involvement with. So again, I don't want to put you on the spot or anything contentious, but just to get your thoughts on where you see the support for those technologies, because they do need support, of course, and they can play a part in decarbonisation. But do you see a more realistic time frame for some of those things? Because again, we touched on this before about sort of home heating and hydrogen, all that kind of nonsense that's still ongoing a little bit.
That's a controversial comment there, calling hydrogen nonsense. Look, I mean, I think again, this is what a good industrial strategy does. It encourages investment in a range of technologies. This is what we will have to do. I don't think we can sit here and say with certainty exactly which technologies will dominate. We've got a good idea that solar and wind at this stage are going to be responsible for the major increase in capacity for energy generation. It's how it's mostly how we will get our self-sufficiency in renewable electricity generation that's part of our plans. Well, what is the role for hydrogen? What is the whole role for carbon capture? Now, there are some industries, there are some products that can only be made by releasing carbon dioxide. Cement is one, glass is another. Mm-hmm. So the development of successful carbon capture, utilisation and storage technologies and capacity are really, really important. There's an awful amount of work needed to transport the captured carbon to where it's going to be stored. But we're very well placed in this country to develop this technology because we've got the places to store it under the North Sea and under the Irish Sea.
Big emitters. I think that's easy sometimes to forget. Steel, cement, glass.
They
These are massive emitters.
So we have to do it for those industries. The production of hydrogen is an interesting challenge. I think increasingly it's looking like electricity is the answer for an awful lot of road transport, including larger vehicles. Mm-hmm. The battery technology is moving on very encouragingly to the extent that HCVs look like it's doable there on longer journeys ultimately, to overcome the problem of having to recharge too frequently. Same with coaches and as well. But for furnaces I mentioned steel before, the same may be true for glass, and for some other energy intensive industries, of which there are any number. Hydrogen looks like it probably is the answer. Mm-hmm. The same may well be true for aviation, but it's probably less likely now for home heat. It's less likely for road transport than it was. Question then is, how do you produce the hydrogen? And how do you produce it in the scale? How do you store it? How do you where do you put it to refuel? And these are really serious challenges. But look, I think there is a role for hydrogen, and I think we have to develop the technology in carbon capture.
I think for that, I mean, certainly green hydrogen is going to be quite expensive, and therefore should be utilised where it has to be. That's the option, rather than in situations like transport where you have alternatives.
There's some very interesting other technologies around about producing hydrogen from petroleum without producing nasty waste products. So I think again, the industrial strategy means we need to encourage investment in working out exactly what is the right combination of technologies, and in the end, it isn't going to be one size fits all. It's not going to be one technology. There's a role for a range of technologies and a range of sources of energy, and I think that's the right way to look at it at the start of 2024, certainly.
Just to touch on one thing, because again, there was this year quite a debacle in regards to a battery manufacturing facility in the UK, and that's something we're still, and we're not alone in that. Obviously, there's a struggle European-wise as well, but to look at manufacturing of some of these technologies in the UK, heat pumps, batteries, even potentially, solar is clearly dominated, as is wind, by China. But we have an opportunity still, I think, to get involved in the manufacture of vehicles, batteries, and heat pumps, some of these other technologies. Is that something which, again, it doesn't fit under your roads and transport?
Yeah, it does. Well, but Labour also published an automotive strategy a few months ago, and we are very keen to develop the battery industry in this country. Gigafactory capacity that we need, which is way beyond where we are at the moment, in spite of some encouraging recent announcements from JLR and one or two others. But we have a long way to go. Alongside that, we've got to roll out the charge points, which we've not had time to really talk about. But that's a fundamentally important area for us, and support our manufacturers. We've got to build consumer confidence to switch to electric. The zero emission vehicle mandate, ZEV mandate, was important. Labour supported that, but as the industry said at the time, it's no good insisting on manufacturers producing these and then undermining the market by telling consumers not to buy them, which is what the Prime Minister did.
Yeah.
So
that's what some of the automotive companies are doing as well.
Yeah, possibly. But so look, we've got to boost consumer confidence and demand by making it, as with public transport, so with electric vehicles, make it easy for people, make it cheap. In the end, this is going to be cheap motoring, actually.
It's very cheap for actually,
it already is. It already is.
Cheap. And also,
but especially if we get self-sufficiency in renewable electricity, that's going to be very cheap then.
Yeah.
So we've got to encourage people to make that switch, and without frightening them. So 80% of car sales are second-hand. People are going to be driving petrol and diesel cars for a long time to come. But it's making it easy to make the switch when they're ready.
Yeah, I think, touching on that, I think there were 16,000 odd fast or rapid public chargers last year installed in the UK, which is decent going, given that there were obviously headwinds in many areas. And I think we're over 50,000 in the UK, which so I think it's good. I drive down to Cornwall and to London and to various places. It's doable. I think
it is doable now, but it takes a bit of getting used to.
Just need to plan it, right?
It was very. The RAC published a report yesterday. It's very frustrating. Only 4 in 10 motorway service stations have got their 6 or more rapid or ultra rapid chargers, and the government set as its target. And the reason is because government hasn't done its bit of making sure the grid connections are there, and so it's fixing these problems that's really, really key. the motorway service station operators want them.
Yeah.
Drivers want them. Come on.
Let's get them in there.
We need to make it happen.
Yeah, because you forget that sometimes. As a sort of a long time EVer, I hardly ever stop at a service station because I know where all of the fast chargers are elsewhere. But for most people, they still assume service station is where you refuel. Yeah. So there's certainly lots of work to be done there. But listen, it's been great to share some of those thoughts with you. I appreciate you coming in to share some of that. In closing, again, one of the key things you've really emphasised there is that kind of collaboration and listening, and which I think for so long it feels like from within the community, the clean tech community, there hasn't been a lot of listening from government. And I don't want to get into the politics or overly, but people, as we run into the new election and from personal perspective, hopefully we get a change of government. Is there a way that people can reach out to yourself and or the government to share? I mean, from businesses' perspective, if they are entrepreneurs, if they're VCs, if they're funders, to try and just hear a bit more about what you'd like to do with and for them and with them, that club, start those conversations so they can make informed decisions as to who to, support in the coming months. Yeah,
look, I mean, very much, David. I mean, LinkedIn is a very good place to be, and people can connect with me on there. They can send me things there. I haven't got time to meet everybody, but people can certainly do me briefings. And I do events. I mean, I've got an event coming up on the 23rd of January. There's still a few places available at it at some extortionate rate. People can come along to that and meet some of my colleagues as well, for example. Yeah. But look, connect with me on LinkedIn. Is a good place to start, and we'll go from there. Because I do encourage people to keep in touch, and or then go through you, and you can pass on the questions.
We can certainly pass them on. Like I said, I hope you enjoyed the episode. By the way, thank you very much, Bill. It is something different. We're back to entrepreneurs and VCs in the coming weeks, but I just felt it was really interesting to get someone who's hopefully has an influence and a greater influence to come in the sector, and we can deal with some of these issues that have been holding us back. But clearly the first thing that really impressed from reaching out to Bill was just someone who's a politician who was listening and understood the technologies and understood things a little bit. And I think sometimes it's hard for politicians because the technologies do change a lot. And it's easy to point fingers, isn't it? And I'm prone to that as well, shout at politicians. But it is complex, and it's great to see a politician or someone who's aware and involved, and obviously participating through the driving yourself, and to be willing to stand up and be contacted by the audience and others. So thank you for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the episode. I will point to Bill's LinkedIn and to various places on the episode page so you can connect, and look forward to a busy and successful Clean Tech 2024. As I say, in the coming weeks, we've got quite a few entrepreneurs and VCs lined up to join us as guests, and hopefully you will join me on those programs too. But for now, thank you very much for watching.